Oh, I'd better press continue here. So as you hear things, they're geared towards general use. As I like to say, where the rubber meets the road with this, how to apply it, how to move through things safely. I will be focusing tonight mostly on death. However, as will be mentioned within the service, we acknowledge the fact that there are many types of grief, and we'll bring some of those up. And this might give you an idea of how to sit with those and work with them as well. So, Michael, can we bring up the presentation? Let's hope this works.
Can everyone see the presentation on screen? Very good.
Okay, like we said, this is adapted. The title is taken from an old LDS hymn. And this is one of the lines, and should they die, the ending of that, of course, is all is well, all is well. We die, we hope all is well. So let's go on to the next slide. And Michael, can you hit the sound on that, please?
We've taken grief out of our homes and moved it into sterile environments. Society wrongly has placed grief on a timer. Get over it. Move on. Get out there on the market. Why are you so upset about that? Death, divorce, an act of God, or the damage we have done on multiple levels to our earthly home, all must be mourned, and there is no set or proper time period for our grief to end. Grief is a process that asks to be honored.
There is no set or proper time period for our grief to end. Grief is a process that asks to be honored. I think in the process of this, when somebody loses a loved one, a friend, family, whoever it might be, oftentimes 6 months after the death has occurred, friends and family are looking at someone saying, "Why aren't you over that yet? Get over it." It's one of the most damaging things someone can say. The fact of the matter is, grief isn't on a timer. It may take a year, 2 years, 5 years, 10 years. Whatever it takes is what it takes. Go ahead to the next slide.
We've taken grief out of our homes and moved it into sterile environments. We've taken grief.
Oh no.
We've taken grief out of our homes and moved it into sterile environments. Society wrongly has placed grief on a timer. Get over it.
Very sorry.
Move
I don't know
on.
how to make that stop.
Get out there on the market. Why are you so upset about that? Death, divorce, an act of God, or the damage we have done on multiple levels to our earthly home, all must be mourned, and there is no set or proper time period for our grief to end. Grief is a process that asks to be honored.
Okay. In ministry, our task is to walk with the person on the journey and not attempt to fix or put out crisis flames. We seek to build understanding for events that are normal to all of us. Death and other life events are not problems, but rather life events that call us to accompany whatever life changes occur. As we move into this, we need to realize that while we've taken death out of the home, it has become distorted. Death is an event. We don't remember our entrance into the world. If you do, I really want to talk to you afterwards. I'd really like to hear that one. We do have some recollection up to the point when we die, and we will recall our death in some way. We'll recall the process of mourning the fact that we're going to die and of moving towards that event. Those who are left behind in life will mourn the event, and they will eventually move on. Let's go to the next slide. The path through grief offers us options, answers, certainty, and the exploration of the unknown. I like this background with it because there comes a point when we hit the time that a person dies, that we're going to have to make a conscious choice as to how we walk with that. Are we going to walk with on a certain path, or are we going to take the path of the unknown, the unexplored? Are we willing to see what happens? Let's go ahead.
The path through grief offers us options, answers of certainty, and the exploration of the unknown.
I'm going to share two stories with you. I don't share client stories because they are confidential, and I honor those who I sit with who share their stories with me. So these will be my stories. We're going to first walk the path of certainty and talk about the pitfalls of doing so. I don't see many pros to doing it, but here we go. Next slide. The big question oftentimes is this in big, bold, friendly letters. Why did this happen now? We're going to take a journey into the Odyssey. We're going to explore 4. We have suffering, education, karma, and relief. And each one of these breed their own particular, shall I say, conflicting process. Now, my issue with these 4 are that they put God into a very tiny box. They take God out of the large box of the universe. They put God into a very tiny, tight box. I don't think God wants to be put there, especially by people who are in pain. Let's go ahead. I lost my younger sister when I was 18, she was 14. Some of the things that I went through are on the next pages. The first thing I tried to do in my mind was to tell myself that God must have needed Joyce much more than I did or my parents did here in this life, that her time was up or her number was up, and that she had learned everything that she needed to know here. So it was okay for her to die. I used this with permission from a client who had a miscarriage. That baby didn't need to come. They just needed to get a body and go home. She was furious. There's not one of these that doesn't trap God. God does not sit with God's finger on the button saying, let's see, which one should I push? I'll make him suffer. That's not how it works. God is compassionate, understanding. One way to combat this when we hear it is to ask, especially when they have children, would you do that to your child? Would you want your child to hear that message? Most people reply no. Next. Oh my. When I heard this, when I thought this, you're going to be such a strong person. You get through this loss. It didn't work that way. I didn't come out stronger from that. I came out with more questions. At 18, I didn't know. Death is not here in life necessarily. God does not cause death to educate us. Death happens because stuff happens. Let's go on. This was one my parents really heard, and I really thought, well, she wasn't meant to be in life that long. Hearing this said, when somebody says that to you, it pierces the heart. A mother who's just lost their newborn has to question. It hurts. And there's nothing you can do about it, except for the mother may want to throw something at someone who says that, because she's in pain. She suffers, she sorrows. And she questions, how could God do this to me? Next. And in her questioning God, she's told they're in a better place now. I was told, you know, you'll see her again. I didn't know that I would see her again. I didn't know I'd see Joyce again. Because one of the things that death does to people is that it causes existential crises. It causes you to look at what you once had in such a way as to question, why am I sitting in the pews on Sunday? Why do I believe there's really a God? Why do I really believe there's a heaven? Why do I believe any of this? When we deal with these four categories of or ways of looking at death, it challenges belief in such a way that is not constructive. It is destructive. I've witnessed people say, well, if that's how God works, I don't want any of it. The fix to that is somewhere else. The fix to that is in taking the next step. So let's go to the next slide. The fix is to get out of the theodicy trap, to learn to reframe, to reconsider, to question, to challenge what we're believing, and to search for healthy ways and healthy support of getting the assistance we need. That might come from somebody who is ministering to us. It might come from pastoral counseling. It might come from doing your own long-term therapy and learning to start to reframe what you had there. My own journey in reframing took decades because I put God in the small box when God needed to be in a grand, spacious, cosmic box. Next. So where did I go? Where I went is part of the reason why this presentation is taking place. In 2016, on August 28th, I lost my husband to suicide. He was bipolar. We both knew it could happen. We had talked about the circumstances under which it happened, or it would happen. And when it did happen, I knew that one of those circumstances had occurred. But this time I was a lot older, a lot wiser. I had begun to dip into a spiritual well. And I believe that it is in dipping into the spiritual well that we actually become more aware of the vast and wonderful possibilities that God can lay out for us. Because God does not want to trap us in that tiny little box. This time around, I was willing to walk the path of uncertainty, to question, to search. And one November night, to finally engage God as I had never engaged God before. I yelled at God. It was pretty ugly. It was risky. And it was the only thing I had left. I didn't yell at God because I was angry at my husband's death. I understood why he had done what he'd done. I yelled at God because I needed to grow up spiritually. I couldn't stay in that box. It was time to exit the center of it, blow it out, and find something new. At the end of that conversation, I was prepared to walk down this rough and rocky path. I was on the road to becoming a spiritual adult in more ways than one. So, where do we go with that? How does it affect those we sit with, those we talk to, those we want to comfort? Here's where the rubber meets the road. Next. Uncertainty requires of us to sit with the unknown. We question what was. We become open to new life outcomes because there is no such thing as certainty. We don't know where the path is going to take us. On August 28, 2016, I could not have told you that in 2018, I would be baptized and confirmed in the community of Christ. That wasn't even an option. It came about because I questioned, challenged, trusted the walk that I was doing. When we sit with others, we are sitting with that questioning. Sometimes, as listeners, we hear those questions as doubts. We don't see them for what they really are, the searching for a new path, a new way, a way to get out of the old tiny box and into the large cosmic box where God dwells and can deal with this on a spiritual or a spiritually mature level. So we journey, we risk, we trip, we fall, and eventually, over a year, 2 years, 3 years, life seems to change. Let's go on. You can see this. I've got it in nice, big, bold, friendly letters. This is a harder path. It's even a harder path to sit with. I'm listing here some of the things that you can see: the existential crisis, the rethinking of who God is or isn't. This doesn't mean a person is losing their faith. This means they're searching for some new valid answers. If death affects all of us, it is okay for the occurrence of death in our lives to challenge what we think. If we aren't challenged by it, we aren't doing the honest work we need to do. If somebody you are sitting with, walking with, says, well, no, I haven't been challenged by any of that, they're not doing the work. Because this process is meant to alter us. We also struggle with the loss of friendship. Many of our friends and even family do not understand how to deal with death or the loss because it's been taken out of the home. They've never had to face these questions. They think grief is on the timer. So why would they bother to look? As I've stated, some of the things I'm talking about, you may run into already. Maybe you've been misunderstood or misunderstood somebody. When they look at you, say, no, I'm not having a spiritual crisis. I'm doubting in a new, healthy way. I'm being challenged to see my life differently. I'm being challenged to look at the path I'm going down in a new way. Death This could cause us to change career paths. Before John's death, my main focus with my psychological practice was general and disability. When John died, my first statement was, I will never work with bipolars. I will never do grief work. What happened? Literally walking on the path that I was on caused me to confront what I thought I would never do and meet it in a new way and question the premise that I had been on, that I would never do these things, and why would I now consider doing them? I considered doing them because I came to realize through the process of time, through a lot of talking with other people, other therapists, that I knew something that a lot of somebody's didn't. I had a very unique skill set. I'd survived a suicide, I've survived traumatic death, and I had a love and understanding that some people who do this work just don't have because they haven't been there. So it wasn't a head thing for me. Because I searched, I sought the new path. It might be well advised for us to refer people into therapy, because sometimes we as ministers just don't have the tools. So I had to give up trying to live perfectly. And this came from an LDS point of view, where we were told that we had to be perfect to be together as a family. I had to give that up. That was part of the spiritual development. Did I really believe that? What did I believe? I needed to focus on this life and only this life. The next life will take care for itself. Let's go on to the next slide. This is for everyone. How can you succeed? What can you do? And what to do? So we'll have a what not to do and a what to do. Let's go ahead. This is a big one. People tend to say what they want to hear. You might want to hear everything will be all right. You can get through this. That's what you might want to hear. The trick in all of this is not to say the things that you would want to hear in that situation, but to find out how someone feels. And understand it from their perspective. Feelings are unique to the individual. People who are grieving want that grief to be heard. So, next. I'm doing the don'ts first, because I'll save the good stuff for later. Don't say any of the following. I know exactly how you feel. No, you don't. And when you say that, especially in the beginning phases of when somebody's first lost somebody, this I get from chat rooms. They're liable to want to scream at you, no, you don't, you don't, you don't. One of the things that was reported, and some of these remarks now come from chat rooms that I've been in, that people were one-upped. Well, when I lost my husband, blah, 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 they give these examples of here's what I did. That might have been great for them, but it's not going to be great for you. This was one that was said to a woman in chat room directly. Her husband had been dead less than 6 months. You have children. You need to put yourself out there soon. Her children were 18 years old, and she had a 2-year-old. It had been 6 months. Once again, one-upping. Your loss wasn't as bad as mine. And then they go on to tell a story. The rule here for these, basically, and what people didn't want others to do, was to tell them any of these things. They wanted to be heard. Let's go on to the next slide. These are a lot happier. How often after the memorial or service, the food dies down, the calls stop, and we think that now that we have that closure to this portion of things, our work is done. Quite the opposite. That period of time was just a few days. The days, months, and even years after are when the real work begins. I don't know how many times in the beginning of my husband's death, I wanted somebody to call, but they didn't. Because people don't know how to deal with suicide. I couldn't have gotten myself out for a walk, but had somebody come by and said, let's go for a walk, I would have gone. And these are suggestions from others. If you offer to do something, do it. If you think you're going to have to back out, don't. Because for most people who are grieving, they deal with more people backing out than following through. And that's something that really hurts people. One woman on a chat site said, drop by and say hello. Didn't matter when. She wanted people to drop by and say hello. Now, this one's important. If you're going to take a meal in, stay and make sure that the person eats it. If it's a family, it's probably going to get eaten. But if it's a couple or a single person, stay and make sure they actually do eat it. And you might be bringing these meals in 6 months after the death. The reason for this is that oftentimes people's appetites will just drop out. They can't put food in their mouth, and they need to put the food in their mouth. There's actually a cognitive, the best way to put it is there's a cognitive divide, and almost a deficit in the brain between getting your needs met and the ability to I'm saying this wrong. Let's just say that some people can't feed themselves, they don't sense their hunger. We are their timers, we are their alarm clocks. We are the person that says, hello, I brought you dinner. I'm going to sit with you while you eat it. So bring some for yourself as well so that they won't feel self conscious. You're going to eat it together. The big do is listen. Don't interrupt. Just listen. They might need to tell you the same story 50 times. Listen to all 50 of them. Each version will be different. And of course, the last one is to remember how long is up to them. This journey's on their time frame, not yours. They'll let you know when they're done. Next. This is one of my pet peeves. People saying, I'm so sorry for your loss. This is a pet peeve amongst people who lose people as well. I actually did a little survey myself on this on Facebook, so it's not really scientific, but I asked people why they said it, because I really don't understand why they say it. What I found out is they're saying it for the most part because they don't know what to say. So as you're reading these, see that some better responses might be that you don't understand. Can you tell me more? Because empathy goes a long way. Sometimes it's about what we do versus what we say. It has more to do with showing up for the person in whatever way we can. What do they need right now? Do they know? In the first month after John died, I couldn't have told you what I needed. I was pretty shocked, and I had a lot on my plate to handle. I had to figure out if I could stay in the home I'm living in, if I needed to leave, if I needed to find something else that didn't cost as much. All I knew is I was going to have to shut down the practice for a while because I was compromised and I could not practice as a therapist if I was compromised in my own head and not able to sort out what I was doing when I was grieving. So I knew I was going to have to find some source that would support me. I didn't know what I needed then. I had to figure that out. So the remark to keep asking, because eventually they'll know. It took me about a year to know what I needed. Let's go to the next post or the next slide. I think these are wonderful. I may not look strong on the outside. I need people to stay connected. Call me, invite me out. I may say no, but keep at it. Things are very different for me. Speak their name and share your memories. I will tell you here that since August 28th, 2016, not one person has ever spoken John's name to me. They're afraid. They're afraid to bring it up. afraid of a reaction, afraid that it might make me feel bad. The fact is, when you lose somebody to death, you want to hear their name. You want to hear the stories. You need to hear those things. I'm not the same person I was before they died. The guy who shared this really meant it. He changed. It had been a couple of years. He'd walked on this journey and discovered a new self. There are some people who grieve every day, even though it appears that they're doing well. People want you to know that really they're not okay. They don't necessarily want you to say, "How are you really doing?" What they want you to say is, "Can I listen to your story? Can I be there for you?" We need our families and friends to check in on us, come by, phone, Zoom us, write us emails, plan crazy activities for us, surprise us, whatever it might be. It's hard down there in that grief hole. I suspect people we walk with in our congregations feel the same way. Next. I want to read this because I think it's important. Someone may not begin the grief process for a year or two more. I'm going to pause this. This isn't denial. It may be necessity. For instance, the will needs to get resolved. The estate needs to get cleaned up. Other things might happen. They may have had to move rapidly to get to another home that they can afford more. Death is traumatic. Don't try to fix it. The fix is in the listening. For both of these two listed on the top of this page, listening will help. If the person can't grieve until further out in the process, they are going to need you at that time, but they're also going to need to know that you're willing to listen in the first stages and when things might not be as rough as they're going to get. If a person can't grieve at the beginning, it might be harder when they do begin because more time has elapsed and they've stored up everything. It's all going to spill out. Note that in your congregations, sometimes we tend to overlook children. Children cope differently with death than adults. They may keep it in. They may think they did something wrong. They may think they caused the death. Just like some kids think they caused the divorce when it was two parents who couldn't get along, who couldn't resolve their differences, who needed to part ways for adult reasons. What's going to happen with most families who lose someone is that the family structure is going to alter. It's not going to stay the same. What looked like a functional family while Harold was living is quite possibly going to shift to a dysfunctional family after Harold goes. Not that the family was not dysfunctional beforehand, it's just the fact that Harold died and now it's okay to show the dysfunction. Or people are just kind of trying to navigate the whole new family issue without Harold being present or without Molly being present, whoever it might be. It's going to shift the family dynamic radically. And that's okay. Don't panic, give it time, and then see what you can do, what kind of help you can offer for this family as a whole on an age appropriate level. Here's a big one. You know, those stages of grief, you know, the ones that Elizabeth Kubler-Ross wrote about? Toss them out. She wrote them for the living, facing death. They aren't for those who have lost somebody already. That's a different walk. You still might feel some of it. You still might get angry at something or grieve. But the trick here is to look at those stages of grief. One of those stages Elizabeth Kubler-Ross wrote about was negotiation. Okay, so person dies. What are you going to say? God, if I'm really good, will you please resurrect John? Will you please resurrect Anne? Will you please bring them back? God doesn't work that way, nor do these stages. Now, I say that kind of tongue in cheek, but it's the best radical example I have of why we don't use them for those who have died. We use listening, we use walking, we use walking on the uncertain path, and we explore what comes up for people. Grief is a journey, and it's a journey into the unknown. And I'm glad it is. Next slide. Now, before we end, I'd like to say that walking the path of the unknown was so much more difficult than what I'd done the first time around. And it's so much more difficult to sit with people who question, who doubt, who get angry, who challenge. It's not an easy path to sit on or in or with. But it's a path that allows us to take God out of that tiny little box and examine God in the grand scheme of things, because we don't know what's going to happen. We don't know where we'll be led. I like these words by Henry Nouwen because they explain and teach so much. Compassion asks us to go where it hurts, to enter into places of pain, to share in brokenness, fear, confusion, and anguish. Compassion challenges us to cry with those in misery, to mourn with those who are lonely, to weep with those in tears. Compassion requires us to be weak with the weak, vulnerable with the vulnerable, and powerless with the powerless. Compassion means full immersion into the condition of being human. I want you to carry those words with you as you are faced with people on this path. And remember that we are asked to join with them and to walk with them on their journey. Thank you.
Thank you, Gail. Thank you so much for your heartfelt presentation and your wisdom. It was just really wonderful. Many, many things to ponder as we work in our own ministries with those who have suffered loss. Thank you so much, Gail. We have just a couple of minutes left. If anybody has any questions for Gail, feel free to come off mute and maybe we can spend the next 2 or 3 minutes before we finish our session with a couple of questions. Go ahead, Susan.
Gail, there are a number of people in various places who are working with the pandemic, who are feeling overwhelmed with the grief and the loss that they're experiencing. These are not individual personal losses, although they are. But in many cases, it's being overwhelmed by the numbers. Many times strangers they don't know or have met very briefly. All of these suggestions that you've shared with us, of course, still apply to our listening and ministering to them. But is there anything in addition that you might share with us as we support and walk with those who are professionally dealing all the time with death, with hospice, loss? Do you have any additional wisdom to share with us?
This one has comes up so much amongst professional colleagues in the last, since early 2020. We've seen the burnout, we've seen the grief, we've seen the helplessness. The best thing that most of us can offer, and what I would offer, is a witness that we see you. We witness the pain. We witness the helplessness you feel at not being able to control something that is airborne, that is not going to end until society gets a conscience, a backbone, and really takes measures to solve it, not just some of us, but all of us. We see that pain. We recognize it. We recognize the overwhelm. What can we do for people when they come home from work? Can we create a care package? I have a girlfriend who took it upon herself to take on one hospital ward of staff. And many of us bought care packages for everyone. It was just a simple gesture that happened once, but we created these care packages. She used Amazon to do it. And then they were shipped out to individuals. They could select which one they wanted, and that's what they received. But they were surprised, because here we were acknowledging that we saw them. We understood that they were coming home from seeing somebody code, from seeing somebody struggle for their last breath, from seeing somebody die alone without family presence. I'd say acknowledging them in that way is really important. One of the things that we can do, just be there to listen, to witness, and validate.
Thank you, Gail.
Um, One of the things that I've noticed in my 50, 60 years of counseling and so on is that the process, the journey of reintegrating your life and so on, people review their relationship with the individual that they've lost, and many times they get engaged in shame. I should have this. If only I had that. Oh, golly, back then. And one of the biggest things that gets in the way of self-compassion is just that, you know, feeling shame and guilt and these kind of things. And I think as ministers, that's one of the things that we can address. We can address it by, joining with all the other humans in this world, that all of us are imperfect. Meditation and mindfulness exercises and those kind of things is what a therapist might use. There are other techniques that I think are beyond what a minister might do who is not trained in psychotherapy, as some of us are. EMDR, polyvagal nervous system, other kinds of things that come into play. But I think this shame is something that we don't often think about, but is there. And the other thing is the reassurance that, just like our parents, at times they'll pop into our head and say, like, my daughter used to say, well, don't scuffle, walk. You're not that old. You're only 83, you can walk like a normal person.
I really think that a lot of this, it all boils down to empathy. Whether we're doing pastoral work, whether we're walking with somebody as a disciple. One of the things I've learned through life is that hindsight is cheap. You didn't do it. And to hold on to hindsight, to say, if only I would have. You can't take it back. It's never going to come back. It's like the parent who has a son or daughter who's gotten themselves into a wee bit of trouble. And the parent saying, if only. Well, if only is going to kill you as a parent, as mentally. If only I had caught that symptom sooner, I'd gotten them to the doctor sooner. If only, well, you didn't. It's okay. Let's focus on making peace with what happened and how you can live peacefully in the future. I think that's a lot of where we need to go, and where ministers can go without having a lot of therapeutic training, is to focus on what can we do now? And if people really need to focus on that hindsight, well, then let's get you a good referral to a good professional, because I'm not trained to do that. I don't know.
Amen. Amen.
We need to become friends.
And it's in their head that the solution will rise. It'll be their answer, not our answer or our reassurance. But knowing that they have this relationship with us, that they are not alone, that they are accepted.
The work that I do as a therapist is not to provide clients answers. I make them find them. Sometimes they don't like me very much, but in the long run, they do, because they realize they found it for themselves. And I think we can do that from a church level. I think we can also do that if we're asking the right questions. I had a meeting with somebody earlier today, and I asked him a question, and he looked back at me. Randall knew who I'm talking about here. He looked back at me and he said, "No, Gail, that's the wrong question." And he reframed it and he said, "I think the question you really want to ask," and then he framed it that way. He said, "Yeah, that is what I want to ask." I think we can help people by reframing what they're asking us or saying, because it's okay if they want the feedback, to give people feedback, to reflect back what we're hearing to them, not in a parroting way, but in a thoughtful, observant manner. And then, can we move forward with it? Can we help them find their own answers? That's part of our job. Not to provide answers, but to have the ability to help them find the answer. Where do you see God working here? I'm also doing a spiritual direction program right now. Thank you, Zoom. I do it in the U.S. And one of the big things that we do in spiritual direction is that we do point out where God is working. We help that person see that. But we can do that with people we're walking with through this journey, just encouraging them, because one of the huge questions is, when is this ever going to end? Will it ever end? And we can tell them, yes, there really will be a morning. There will be a time when somehow, and I don't want to use the word magical because it isn't, that somehow time will shift where they are. They will have been doing the work that they need to do, and they'll wake up one morning, they'll look out the window, and they'll see the new sunrise in a new way. And they'll realize what they're seeing, and they'll sit there with it, and they'll go, wow, when did that happen? How did that happen? And that's when they'll know that their walk on this path out of grief to something new has made a difference. And that maybe someone who was sitting with them also made a difference.
Thank you again, Gail. And thank you for those who asked questions. And we're just so delighted that people from all over North America and Europe, United Kingdom were able to join us today for the Disciples Toolbox. We'll have more information about our sessions for October and November coming soon on social media. You're always welcome to join us in Community Circle. We wish you all a lovely day. These are recorded, as I mentioned before, so you will be able to find these in the coming weeks on our social media, or also on Community of Christ Europe's social media pages or YouTube pages as well. So if you would like to get this again and rehear and see that the PowerPoint presentation, you'll be able to find it there. Take care, everyone, and be blessed.